What are some of the mistakes you're always keen on when an entrepreneur is pitching?
An investor must know their product. An investor must be passionate and must demonstrate that. An investor must know their financials. I don't know whether or not you've all watched the program Dragon's Den. We have a Kenyan Dragon's Den. We have a British, a UK Dragon's Den. And the thing that comes up time and again, and I've watched the program many times, and it's a very logical thing. If you are looking for an investor to invest in you, you must know your numbers. You really must. You must know what your projections are. You must be able to support those projections. Yeah. So you must have done your background on that. If you're asking for a certain amount of money, you must know what you intend to do with that money. So you must be able to justify why you're asking for that amount of money. And of course, there'll be times when we're using projections, but those projections must be realistic. They must be supported by where you are saying there is a gap in the market. They must be supported by the potential of where you are saying your target market is. You know, this is the thing that often is not explored well enough. You may be fortunate that an investor looks at you and trusts you, going back to what I was talking about before, and believe in you. You may also be fortunate that an investor sees perhaps more than what you see in the potential of your product or service. And then they are willing to invest in you. But generally, if you are looking for somebody to put money into your business, you must understand your numbers, you must understand your financials, and you must communicate that to them. So it's that, in addition to what I've already said, which is how you come across. Yeah. And again, I can't emphasize is trust. Yeah. And transparency. And when I'm talking about trust and transparency, it doesn't mean that you need to have something so well laid out. Ideally, if you're in the stage of developing a product, you will have some prototype, or you will have some, clear explanation as to what the end product is going to be, some clear samples, examples of what that end product is going to be. But what is important is that you are transparent about it all. So it's not that an investor actually needs to see a perfect product. It's not that an investor needs to see that you've done all of your homework, but you need to be honest about where you are at. And at times, an investor can look and say, you know what, I have these certain skills and I can get you there, I can help you. But it's for you to be honest and transparent about where you really are at. But in the same breath, it's also for you to have done your homework and to have gone as far as you possibly can. Yeah. That's what I would say about that. In particular, I mean, they're not mistakes, but I don't know if you would like me to share something a bit about what an investor is actually looking for. So these are just the simple contents that one would be expecting in, a typical investor pitch deck. So they're looking for you to explain what the problem is. Now, the problem usually comes from a gap. So what's the gap in the market which has created a problem for which you have the solution to? Yeah. So taking again the hyacinth is quite an obvious thing. The problem is that it blocks Lake Victoria. The solution is We cannot get rid of it necessarily, but we can utilize it. Yeah, so that's our solution. We've spoken about the market. What are the market segments? Have you looked at your competition? What is out there in the market? We've already spoken a little bit about exploring your competition, not just as a direct competition, but what are the alternative solutions? And then what is your business model? Yeah, and when we talk about a business model, what we're talking about is, do you have a different pricing solution? Do you have a different supply chain? You know, what is your niche? What are you looking at? Then we're talking about your roadmap. What is your path? Yeah, what is your direction? How are you actually going to achieve what you want to achieve? And where will you gain traction? Yeah, where will things hit and hold onto the market and make your product or service a sustainable one? And then you've got the marketing and the sales. Today, you know, we're fortunate that we're able to do a lot of very inexpensive marketing through social media. And it's important to show that you're able to do that. However, you have to prepare, you have to have your marketing strategy. And then, of course, as we've said, you've got to have your financials. You've got to have your team. Who are the people that are going to help you? Yeah. Are they as strong as you? Are they the right people? And then an investor always wants to know, what are you going to do with their funds? How are you going to use their funds? And an investor also wants to understand, if I want to come out of it, how do I come out of this investment? And very perhaps obviously, it's got to be, an investor pitch should be simple, it should be clear, and it should be well laid out. And the number of pages we're talking about might be, you know, between 12, 14, 15 pages. So it's not a very large document, because generally what they say is that investors don't have time to look at all of the documents, yeah, to go through and to go through pages and pages of stuff. However, having said that, if an investor wants to know more about any of these areas, you should also have that ready. And hence, we often talk about preparing business plans. So a business plan should be the start. An investor's pitch comes from your business plan. So we've spoken about the product. Does it fill a gap? Yeah. What is the product's quality? And what is the product's unique selling proposition? And those are things that will, you know, if you have a good quality product, and when I talk about good quality product, I'm not saying that you need to produce a product that is, you know, top of the range. I'm talking about a product that is good value for the money. So however you price it, the quality of the product is commensurate to the price or slightly above. That's what we're talking about. And a unique selling proposition, what makes you stand out from the others? Yeah, what makes your product different? Then we've got your target market. As I said, it's important to really define who your target market is, and don't be small in it. Explore and understand, you know, where that target market can go eventually. So for example, you might be talking about, again, if I just use that, the hyacinth example, you might be talking about, okay, let me cross the border to Uganda, because they have Lake Victoria as well, so they may have similar problems. Yeah. And then competitors, what are alternative competitor products to hyacinth? We've got a lot of plastic, although now we're looking to remove the plastic products, but we've got sisal, which could also be used in a similar way. So, you know, it's a matter of exploring the direct the direct competitors as well as your alternative. You know? And again, the environment. What is the external environment? In other words, your uncontrollable factors that may positively or negatively impact on your product or service and how it's taken in the market. What are your prospects? And what are the market dynamics? I've already mentioned in terms of the team, the organization, what equipment do you actually have available? Now, in terms of, again, some of the SOMO presentations that we've seen, we are very creative people. We're very industrious people. And of course, you know, if you go into the industrial area, you go along the lines of Baba Dogger Road, you go into many areas, you see entrepreneurs, you see the Juakali sector developing equipment that can be used. Yeah. So, I mean, these are all positive things, and these are things that can also take your product or service further. So we want to see what equipment and what systems you actually have in place. When I talk about systems, I talk about your supply chain. I talk about what you could possibly use in terms of technology. And then, of course, our financials. What are our volumes likely to be? What are the revenues likely to be? What are your cost price and your selling prices? What is your profitability and what is your capital required? So all of these are things that an investor wants to know. And one of the good things about you preparing an investor's deck, in fact, I think I'm actually asking, so I will actually stop my presentation there in terms of that and come back to you, because I know it's one of your questions. Yeah, so I will stop there, and if you have, if there's anything else you would like me to say or you would like to ask from there.
Thank you for that. I have a question. So
yeah.
Most of these entrepreneurs are maybe on the idea stage of their businesses. And you mentioned about them presenting financials that are true, and that are probably, let's say, make sense. So how would you advise an entrepreneur who has no idea on how to go about that? Because most of them have issues coming up with numbers at that particular point. Yeah.
Right. You know, basically numbers are based on what your potential is and what your actual is. So if you don't actually have actual numbers, then you're going for your projections. Yeah. And you should have an idea first in terms of what the costs will be, because that's an area that you would have explored. Yeah. So, for example, you would have looked and seen what your materials are. What materials do you require? Yeah. So what are all of your product or service inputs? And so the cost of those, are there any labor inputs? Yeah. Are there any equipment inputs? Are there any transport inputs? So when you're starting from the part of the costs, you should be able to do that. Yeah. And at times, an entrepreneur or somebody starting out won't cost their own time. It's also important to cost your time. Yeah. So your human resources and your contribution of time into that product. So if you actually have a cost, yeah, then you would start to look and say, what can my markup be? Yeah. When you have a markup and you have a cost, you have a potential price range. When you have a potential price range, then it's a matter of going into the market and seeing what the potential, what the market is likely to bear. And from that, you know, in order to see that, you are looking at what your competitors are pricing their product, similar products at, or alternative products. Because if it's an alternative, then it's a similar target market. Yeah. So that's the way I would look at it to arrive at certain costs. And then you're talking about the feasibility of quantity, volumes. Yeah. It may well be that you cannot produce a certain product without a certain type of equipment that will enable you to make 100 per week. Whereas without the equipment, you know, you can only make 20. Yeah. So if you know you can only make 20 a week, yeah, then you have, say, a scenario 1. Without the equipment, I can only make 20. I have my cost price, I have my selling price, and now I have my volumes. Yeah. And I have the timeline, which is weekly. So in a month, I will be making 80, etc. Yeah. And that's my scenario 1 setup. My scenario 2 setup is that I'm going to be able to hire the equipment, so my costs are going to go up a little, but it's going to enable me to make 100. And then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to go through, yeah, and say, I'm going to make 100, and that equipment might actually enable me to cut one of the manual processes out. So it actually might provide me with a cheaper solution. So my cost price actually might go down. Yeah. And then you might be looking and saying, okay, let's get into economies of scale. If I'm able to produce 100 a week, and I'm able to sell, you know, 80% of those, I might be able to reduce my selling price. Yeah. So that can be your scenario 2. Your scenario 3 is I have to be break even. Yeah. Or your scenario 4 might be, with an investor, I might be able to produce 1,000. Yeah. So those are the kind of things that you're looking at each time. You're going through and creating scenarios. Now, those scenarios are actually fairly straightforward to plot. I've seen the SOMO as part of your training. You give very simple Excel spreadsheets. Yeah. And within those, you should be able to chart out some of those scenarios. Yeah. And of course, I know the SOMO team can guide you all through that process. And so when you have those scenarios, you start to build on projections. Yeah. And those projections are formed from your realities. So it's not that, again, an investor is looking to say that you're able to produce 100,000. And why are you going to produce 100,000? Because 100,000 is going to give you a 5 million shilling profit at the end of the month. Yeah, that's not what an investor is looking for, because it's not realistic. Yeah, if it is realistic, then you'll be able to justify it. Yeah. So what you need to do is you want to be able to justify what's realistic for you, but you need to be able to give the scenarios. What's the least attractive to what's the most attractive? Yeah. And then you could create another scenario where you are saying that in 6 months' time, this is where I will be. Yeah. Of course, your projections should be actually 1 year, 2 year, 3 year projections. Yeah. So if you're doing projections over a period of years, it's much easier to try and say in 3 years, being realistic, the investor will get their return, because within the 3 years after year 1, your volumes can shoot up because of A, B, C. Yeah. So that's the way you would actually create it, but start it from reality and then build on it. Yeah. But it's very possible, yeah, to see numbers in a very basic and a very general way. You don't need to look on numbers in a way of saying that I must be a financial person. I must understand a profit and a loss account. It's not really about that. What it's about is looking at where your volumes are likely to be and can feasibly be, what your costs are likely to be, and then what your markup is likely to be, or what your target market can bear in terms of its markup. And again, as I say, that's coming from what your competition's doing and what your target market, what you feel your target market can afford. There's no point, for example, to be going in with a product that is going to cost 1,000 shillings a week to use, and your target market are people that may be living below the poverty line. Yeah. So there's no point in producing a product which is not necessarily a critical part of one's requirements, but it will cost 30% of their monthly income. Yeah. So these are all things that you need to actually think about and assess in order to arrive at numbers. Yeah. And once you get those ideas, then you can ask somebody who is more skilled in numbers to, generate more formal numbers from that. Yeah, or more formal financials from that.